Tell me about your family life, what life was like in Youngstown growing up.
Actually, one of my earliest childhood memories was of hiding a gun because my stepfather was an abusive alcoholic. And when he drank, he got more abusive, both to my mother and to my brother and myself. When we moved to Fayetteville, actually Spring Lake was the city, and then shortly thereafter I found out that I was pregnant. So I quit school when I was 15. And then my daughter was born when I was 16. And she lived for about 4 months and then died of acute bronchial pneumonia.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the New Earth Lawyer podcast. My name is Geraldine Johns-Putra. I'm a lawyer based in Melbourne, Australia. I live and I work on Boonwurrung country, and I wish to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Today, we have with us Dr. Pearlette J Ramos. Pearlette is a transformational leader. She's a lawyer. She's a social justice advocate and a writer. She guides transformational journeys around the world. She facilitates women's empowerment workshops, and she coaches others towards living life with passion and purpose from a place of authenticity. She comes originally from Youngstown, Ohio, and she overcame significant obstacles, including poverty, abuse, teenage motherhood, and dropping out of high school to become today a respected lawyer and a world traveler. Pearlette, it's a privilege to have you on.
It's my pleasure to be with you. Thank you for the invitation.
Now, one of the things that jumped out at me as I was preparing for this episode was that you're a lawyer and a world traveler. And I thought to myself, wow, what does world travel look like, Pearlette, in the time of COVID? So I thought we'd start there.
Well, it looks like certainly a little bit different than it did prior to COVID. And in fact, I had a trip planned for 2020 that I postponed just because people were feeling, trepidatious about traveling internationally. So I'm going to say it looks like responsible traveling. It looks like doing research on what the requirements are in both leaving the country if you're going outside of the US, because obviously you can travel within the US or within whatever country you're in. But looking at the testing requirements to exit and to enter, and then obviously how to be the most safe, but while still giving yourself the permission to explore the world and yourself, because that's a big part of what my journeys are about. It's about exploration of your inner world as well as your outer world simultaneously.
So pre-COVID, you were guiding groups to places around the world. Could you give us some examples of some of the journeys you've been on with people?
Sure. And when I say people, it's primarily women. Although, there's been a man or an occasion or two that have been on the journeys. But some of the places that we've been include Italy, Morocco. We've been to Antarctica and Chile, Argentina. So those are some examples. And we have a trip coming up next month, September 2020, to Tanzania. There's a group that will be hiking Kilimanjaro, and then after that, we'll enjoy the Serengeti and Zanzibar.
Amazing. Africa is one place that I've missed out on going to. Up to now, I did South America a few years ago. I've done it twice. So all of the places you're talking about, I really miss. How did you get into travel as a means of transformation?
Wow, that question is about my life journey.
Oh, well, we want to hear
Really?
it, Pearlette.
It's about my life journey. So here's what I'll say. It's happened organically on some level, and it was also inspired very much from my childhood dreaming. You mentioned some of the challenges I had as a little girl.
Yeah.
Growing up in an abusive home and in poverty. And so what I would do, frankly, was to pray to God. And my prayers included dreaming, creating through my imagination a world outside of the limitations of my upbringing. And I had hoped and prayed that I would one day see the world. And so that was the seed that was planted many years ago, and then life lived through me organically on some level, because I had to get past a number of limitations I felt, financial limitations. It can be expensive. It doesn't always have to be. My traveling alone as a woman, what will people think, and will I be harmed? And then as I continued to express this life that was living through me of exploration. So now I say I'm a navigator. I didn't know that I was a navigator, but I've come to understand that that is just a part of that spirit that I felt, an energy when I was 8 years old praying, that I've allowed life to live through me. And so who I am is not just a navigator, but I like to say I collect experiences. And, I add the two of those. And, my prayer as a 52-year-old woman, so it's been a while since I had those prayers at 8, is not just to experience the beauty and wonder of the world and what transformation can happen when you allow yourself the freedom to just be and to explore yourself, but it's also then helping to create those journeys for other women in particular, because we tend to be caregivers for others and focus our attention, our finances, our energy on caring for, spouses and children and communities. And then we kind of come last. And so I'll say organically, but maybe also not, the business that I've created, and it's really more of a passion that's turned into a business, is one of wanting others to really explore the fullness of who they are and to have spaciousness to do that, and going away and allowing yourself to kind of be transported outside of the limitations of the identity that you have as a woman who does this and that and who has this obligation, into, okay, I'm free, quote unquote, from that for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 6 days, whatever the time frame is. What do I want to explore within myself as I explore outside of myself? And then how can I integrate that in such a way that I come back renewed, and not just renewed because I've been away, but renewed because I've experienced myself in a more deep and profound way, that I feel more integrated and connected when I come back to my life, and I can bring that with me.
Wow, so much in that, Pearlette. There's a strand, well, there are many strands I want to pick up on, but the first one I'd love to pick up on is the idea that things come from prayer and or dreaming. So I've had that experience myself. When I was a child, I lived very much in my interior mind, and I used to construct quite elaborate daydreams. And at some point in my life, after I went to university and after I started my legal career, and there were things that were happening in my life where I would pause and say to myself, oh my goodness, this is what I wanted when I was a child. This was the prayer I had to God, or the dream that I was dreaming. Did you have that experience? You created this somehow through your intention and your longing?
Oh God, I love that question. You just make me want to be long-winded right here in this conversation.
Go right ahead.
Wow. Okay. So here's what I also have to say. After practicing law for about 12 years, I went back to school. I earned a Ph.D. in psychology. I focused on the concentrations were spirituality and consciousness. And what you just asked me hits right square in the middle of that. And so I believe that, I believe that we're all meant to live an extraordinary experience. And the longings that we have, I believe, I'll call them longings, intuition, the connection to what's beyond our mind, because I believe that intuition, or the collective consciousness, is beyond the mind, the limitations of the mind. And so when we can access that as adults, but certainly when we're children, I think we have greater access, because we're not limited by the hardened personalities that we create to cope and live in the world, that puts pressure on our uniqueness, who puts pressure on our creativity and curiosity. And so to answer your question, yes, as a little girl who was, abused, who was raised in poverty, who had like a lot of trauma, like by the time I was 16, I had quit school and gotten pregnant and gotten married. My daughter had died. It was just a very traumatic childhood. I still had a very sincere soul spiritual connection, energetic connection to my dream. So that despite everything that was happening in my life, I was always clear that there was something more for me than whatever was happening. And so the quest, the calling that I felt was, okay, this is what's in my material world. And then there is something else that's calling me forward. I'm just going to continue to listen to that, which is what I've done.
Yes.
That's the navigation I think that we all have present. It's just deciphering those voices that we hear that says, oh, this is the world and this is what it is. Some would say that's fear-based, like I have to live within the confines of this. And then there's this other aspect of us that's always like, hey there's this other possibility for you. And when we tune into that, then it's like, oh, well, what is that? And how can I express that more in the world? So yes, been aware of that. And, just because of life, at times I've been a great listener. At times I have not. And the more that I've listened, that's why I say life is lived through me. At 52, my goal is really to listen to that voice and allow it to lead my life. And as I've been practicing that as a practice in the world, it's taken me to extraordinary places, not just to all of the continents, because that wasn't my dream when I was 8.
Yeah.
My dream was to go to Paris. Frankly, my dream was to go to Italy because I thought all little girls wanted to go to Italy and Paris, but it wasn't like to see the continents and to, traverse. And now my longing is to be in the wilderness, and because I feel the connection of Gaia more profoundly. And so as I've allowed it to live through me and to listen, it's taken me in directions I could have never imagined, ever.
Well, a lot of your story reminds me of Viktor Frankl's book, the Search for Meaning. When he was in a concentration camp, he never let go of the larger reality. And that really got him through what he was suffering at the time. So my sense is by holding on to, that higher self or that imagination, that inspiration, you were able to overcome and not dwell in all of the trauma that you went through early. So you actually healed yourself. Would you say that that's right?
Well, so I'm going to say yes. And healing, let me just go back a little bit. We're human, which means we have frailties. Yeah. So the process of healing for many of us is just a lifelong journey. I don't proclaim to be, enlightened in I won't say in any way. I'm certainly more enlightened than I was when I was struggling in a consciousness of struggling. What I'll say is it has shifted my mindset, having the access to my imagination. And there's whole books now written on like the biology of belief. Yeah. I had a belief system that was formed very early on that I held on to despite what was happening in the world. And that belief system gave me hope that my life could be better despite whatever my circumstances were. And that hope and belief then motivated me in my actions because I moved my actions in conformity with my belief system. And that helped me to develop resilience. And there's all this area of psychology now called positive psychology. Many of us have heard about the research that's been done on meditation and, spirituality, on creativity, on mindfulness, on a whole host of things, strengths-based research that says, there's this way that we can evolve and grow despite challenging traumatic life circumstances, and post-traumatic growth is even possible. You don't necessarily have to be limited by the things that happen to you. As we raise our awareness, which is why consciousness and awareness is so powerful, that we can actually then make it mean whatever we choose to make it mean. And it's in the power of what we make the things mean that get to determine to a great degree what our outcome is. Not for everyone in every circumstance, because we live within structures, but in many cases we can transcend those structures with a combination of personal attributes and skills, as well as, I think, strategy and support from others.
So it's like that interplay between that part of you that is divine, shall we say, for want of a better word, and a part of you that's human, that's living here. So the divine gets to live through the human, and the human gets to shape the human experience. And really the most fulfilling life, and you talked about expanding your life so that it can be meaningful. The most meaningful way to live life is to have that perspective and to see it as really this wonderful, almost candy store of possibility, and work with that divine self to create more exciting opportunities for yourself, is how I would see it.
Yeah. And I think the challenge is when you feel like you've been oppressed because you may have been oppressed, or you've been abused, or you're in poverty, and you're struggling. And even if those aren't the cases, because we struggle in various ways every day, right? With mental health challenges, work-related stressors, in the work that I do with lawyers, as well as women who are lawyers, feeling a sense of helplessness to the system, whatever the system is, whether it's familiar or work-related system, is one of the challenges. It's how can you be in the world and not be of the world? So yes, this limitation is here, this physical limitation, right? This psychological limitation, this work-related limitation, and feel a sense of freedom, because freedom is a state of mind. That's what it is a state of mind. So if I free my mind from, okay, this is happening, and there's a way for me to experience, joy in the midst of this, or contentment in the midst of this. Let me just be curious. How do I access that within myself? I think it's one of just the challenges of being in Western society right now, because we all have experienced limitation. Let me just say this real quickly, because you mentioned COVID, in a roundabout way, and traveling during COVID. I find it very ironic how as generally, people have responded so differently to not being as free to travel, or not being as free to spend time with their loved ones, or to go to restaurants even. And I set an intention. And so this is an example for me. I set an intention going into COVID, like the lockdown, of how I was going to be, because it shapes my mindset, because I live an intentional life. It was like, okay, I love to travel, and I do a lot of it when we don't have the situation, but I didn't want to feel negative about the experience. Like, oh God, I can't do this. And I really normally do. I didn't want to run a tape around feeling deprived. So I was like, what intentions could I set for myself during the next, however long this lasts, that would expand who I am, even in the confines of this limitation? Because I'm not going to go as much as I would normally go. And here's what I discovered, and I'll be really brief. First of all, I didn't know how much running back and forth, traveling, how taxing it was, because I did it all the time. I just did it all the time. It was normal. But sitting with, myself for longer periods, I reimagined what that time would look like. And so I started spending more quality time with myself, doing various activities. I started teaching more, online. And what I found was, now that, during this last 5 or 6 months, as people were gearing back up, I was like, oh, my nervous system had calmed down. I was actually more relaxed. And so, it begs the question for me, how can whatever's happening in life, how can my response be one that really helps me to maintain my equanimity in here? And so I'm still very curious about that, because it's happening again, right? It's like, oh, we were able to go now, this is happening. And so it's so easy to feel a sense of powerlessness and frustration when these forces outside of ourselves are inhibiting us, or we feel inhibited. And yet there is a capacity to create within our own experience. Well, in light of this happening, how can I experience my life differently in a way that might expand me?
Well, let's bring that thought. Sorry, Pearlette.
No worries.
Bring that thought to women, the solo female traveler. And I have been a solo female traveler a lot. In fact, when I did it years ago, in my 20s, I went to China on my own, and everybody around me worried about it, even though it was a very structured adventure. And after that, I couldn't get enough. I loved it. I loved doing it on my own, making my own decisions, going where I felt guided to go. So tell me how you would take that sense of breaking through limitation as a traveler and how it pertains to women.
Well, I'll give you one of my own practical experiences. I used to travel with a girlfriend back, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago when I first started. I was talking with a woman at work. We decided to travel together because we both had no one to travel with, and we were afraid at that point to travel alone. We did it for 2 or 3 years. We would just write down on our list the top 10 places we'd like to go, and then we'd match the list, and that's where we'd go. And then her life situation changed, and she started working in her own business, and she couldn't, for various reasons, go. And I had a decision to make, whether I was going to stop going because I didn't have a partner, or whether I was going to go alone. Mm. And I was scared to go alone because, the world's a scary place, because what are people going to say? What am I going to do? I have no one to talk with. I need someone to share this with. I had a whole list of reasons. And yet by that time, I had felt such joy by experiencing the world. I didn't want to stop. So I looked at the limitation, like I feel scared because of these reasons, and just say I had 10 reasons. And I'll call that my ego self. My ego self said, you can't go because of these reasons. And then I created a list of all the counters to the ego reasons of this is actually how you can go, and this is how you can go safely, and this is how you can take care of yourself. And I created for myself an adventure that I could not deny. And I had always wanted to see the pyramids, and that was like the next on our list. So I went to Egypt by myself. That was my first solo trip, was to Egypt.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say, because it's so true, I had probably a better time than I ever had with anyone. For several reasons, one of which I'm not going to give all the reasons, but one that was really powerful that I use in all of my journeys now when I go alone. I give myself a task to transcend. I call them warrior tasks. Yeah. I give myself a task that, okay, on this trip, I'm going to get over this limitation. So on that trip, it was going alone.
Yeah.
So I created like this wonderful adventure for myself that I was going to do all these things. And I did all of those things, and I came back like, oh my God, I did that. This is fantastic. On other trips now, and I'll give you one, when I went to Antarctica, I mentioned in 2018, that culminated my traveling to all of the continents, which at some point in the last 20 years had become one of my goals. And the task there was really to do some self-inquiry on, I'll call it a rites of passage. I was 49, about to turn 50. And there are some ways in which I wanted to leave behind certain habits, I'll call them structures in my personality, that I didn't really want to carry with me into my 50s.
Yeah.
One of those, for example, was I had always considered myself to be an intellectual, left brain type person, analytical. I'm a lawyer. And yet spirit was calling me to express my creativity in the world. Now, what I had been doing for 15 years or so had been taking photos. I love photography. My website is full of my own photography, by the way, but I didn't share it with anyone because I didn't think it was good enough. I was in this judgment. It's not good enough for anyone else but me. And that was one of the limitations. I was like, you know what? I don't really want to take into this next, however long I'm going to live. Like it's not good enough because, and I have this desire to express my creativity. So I'm going to leave in Antarctica. So I jumped in the Antarctic as my warrior task to myself, with the idea of cleansing my body, cleansing my mind, cleansing my spirit and energy, and leaving that behind and emerging as, okay, in this next, however many years I've got, 50 plus, I'm actually going to allow myself to express the fullness of myself, whether that's my logical, analytical self, or if it's my creative self. And from that, in part, this documentary project was born because it combines all the things that I love, women who I think are fantastic and amazing, travel, which I'm passionate about exploration, and then also changing the narrative about women, and particular women of color, and doing it in a way that combines women's empowerment, the beauty of hiking, which I'm passionate about hiking as well. And so this creative endeavor was really born out of, remember I said I go and then I come back different. So now I'm going to practice this in the world. I'm practicing demonstrating what I committed to when I was away, when I was really centered within the fullness of myself. Now I get to bring it and incorporate it into who I'm being. And so, long-winded way of giving you an example, but it is a full example of how I started and then where I am right now with that.
Well, I really want to get into the documentary that you're creating. There is one point I want to make though, and that is that sense of women expanding themselves and then connecting with places on the earth. So hearing you talk about what you were going to do in Antarctica, so it had an impact on you, but you would have had an impact on Gaia there. I've been to places where I have wondered why I was called to go there, and then I've realized that there was something mystical or special. I've been to Orkney in northern Scotland. I've been to Maui, and those were a couple of places where I came back from feeling like I was changed, and I couldn't really explain why. But it was an expansion of me into those places and then allowing something from those places to come into me, which is really the gift of travel.
And connecting in nature.
Yes. I can't understate that. But I do want to talk about 3 Extraordinary Women. That's the name of the documentary. Please, I'd love to hear all about it. And I think everyone listening or watching this would want to hear about it.
Sure. And I'm just going to give a brief introduction because I love lawyers. We have such a capacity, I think, to create, and we do all the time. And I don't think what's happened to me in my experience is unique in that we're all multifaceted and have so many different skills and abilities that we can express. And sometimes we allow ourselves to do that, and sometimes we don't. And so I just hope, like, here's my prayer for anyone who is listening and or watching. It is that if you hear, an aspect of yourself really calling you forward to step into something that you don't feel comfortable with, that you just follow that, be curious, in a humble, curious kind of way of what is that, and allow yourself to really experience whatever it is that you're feeling called to experience in a way that might enhance you. And that's how the documentary was born. And so when I was in Antarctica, I had this vision really for how I'm going to live 50 plus. And it included my incorporating many of the things that I'm passionate about. I went to law school because I wanted to help women. And I saw how I believe the laws were disproportionately impacted women and people of color. And then I got sidetracked because like many aspiring law students, I got a lot of debt, and I was the first person in my family to go to college and certainly law school. And then, so I got a job that could help pay for my bills. And so a part of this journey for me at 50 was, okay, now that, you're in a better financial position, and now that your children have matriculated through college and I was able to help them, now what is really calling you? And as I listened in that journey, because by the way, we were 3 days on the sea, it was just me and me. I journaled and wrote and cried and released and got really clear, like the things that I'm passionate about. I had limitations in my mind. Like, I can't make money doing that, so I can't do that. So then I had to kind of work through, what are these limitations? Being curious, like, really, you think that? Might be something that you need to look at. Maybe that's not true, that sort of thing. And so as I worked through that process, I came to my passion has never changed around women's rights issues and social justice. And I really want to devote the rest of my life focused there. The second piece was I love traveling and expressing my creativity, first through photography, like I mentioned, and then through videography, which I've organically just started doing through time. And then I was like, maybe there's a way that I can bring all of these things together. And I just left it as a question. And what I wrote as my prayer and my mantra was really divine love creates through me. That's my mantra. Divine love creates through me. And I was like, okay, the divine, whatever it is you'd have me do, that's my prayer is that I'm clear and I can distinguish when you're talking to me versus my ego talking to me, and that I will follow. So just humble heart and willingness. Over time, essentially, this is what happened. I have a commitment to travel, and I'm just going to do it until the day I die, or I'm no longer able to do it. I had reached out to a number of friends and said, hey, I want to go on this trip to Tanzania, because I also consistently create goals that allow for me to challenge myself physically, running marathons. And that's what I mean physically, doing things that help keep me engaged with exercise, basically. And the short of it is three of us, or two additional women, stepped forward to say they would like to hike Kilimanjaro. Another couple women said that they wanted to go on the other pieces, but they didn't want to hike Kilimanjaro. And I was talking with someone about this journey that we're going to hike Kilimanjaro and we're going to go to Zanzibar and to the Serengeti. And the person said, oh my gosh, that's like amazing. You just don't normally hear about women doing this sort of thing. I said, really, it's the kind of thing I do all the time. And women that I know, like, we just do this kind of thing all the time. And he said, no, actually, the Pearlette, I think that's really inspirational. And I said, you think that's inspirational? And so it started off very humbly like that. And then I had a conversation with their Terry and Tami, who are the two other women who are going on this journey. And so from that initial spark and seed being planted in my mind, I looked at our individual life stories and I saw a theme that ran through each one of our stories. And so basically, the documentary tells the story of three women who've experienced early childhood trauma, who use that trauma to inform their lives, and who develop resilience as a post-traumatic growth, and who now have engaged in, and have been, in some of our cases, lifelong, engaged in social justice activities. And so it tells, and just real briefly, Tami, her mother was murdered in front of her when she was 6 years old. And so it tells her story of what meaning did she make out of that? And then how did she become, an environmentalist? And she works in marketing for a Fortune 500 company and engages socially, politically in Dallas, Texas.
1975, June 7th. I was in kindergarten and I saw a shadow of a man walk across our front yard or front lawn in front of the windows to our front door, and knocked on the door. Just so happened that this guy was stalking my mother. He shot through the door, and the bullet struck my mother in the chest. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. I was, screaming, and she was present. And she told me that she loved me. And, I was saying, I love you too, Mommy, I love you too. And my mother bled out there and passed away before the ambulance could get there.
Dallas, Texas. Tami is from Palestine, and she was 10 years old when Israel invaded Palestine. And when she was 14, she was sent to the US because she was politically active, and she says her mother thought she was a liability. So she sent her to the US away from her family. And then she was told that she had to drop out of school to take care of her family and to bring them to the US. And so for 3 years, I say she was an indentured servant. From 15 until 18, she worked as a dishwasher to raise money to bring her family here. And then she went on to support her family. Actually, she still supports her mother.
There?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you'll say Terry, take one.
Are we ready?
Be ready.
Okay. Terry, take one.
I was born in the city of Ramallah, 7 miles north of Jerusalem. My life was wonderful till age 10. Israel invaded the rest of Palestine, and we became under occupation. And my life.
What does that mean?
That's mean hell. If just simply with one sentence, hell. Your life stopped being your life. Somebody took charge of what you do, when you do it, how you do it. Even inside your homes, you could be sleeping at 2 o'clock in the morning, and soldiers will come into your house, take your dad, put him on the wall, and you're standing there screaming because you thought they're going to shoot him.
And then there's my life story, and you've heard a bit about me. I know both of these women personally, and yet the theme is we had this early trauma, and we each made it mean something that was empowering to ourselves. And my thought was, oh, there's a way to tell this story that juxtaposes all the things that I love: women, storytelling, the beauty, nature, and traveling. I had never been a filmmaker before, but very much open. And then I started really feeling the call to create.
Yeah.
So I was impregnated with this idea that really started sometimes like they start. And then as it evolved, I owned that this was my story to tell. There's a director, her name is Cio Lorenzo, and I have a co-producer who are her name is Sheena, and with the Georgia box office. They have the industry experience. I don't have industry experience. What I have is a creative mind that I've honored, that I actually do have a creative mind, and a whole bunch of other skills, including the legal skills you need in order to formulate contracts and negotiate deals and follow through, which is where the fullness of me is present to birth this project.
Okay, so you're on the road now because the Kilimanjaro trip is happening in September.
Yes, for
You're
a little over
preparing
4 weeks.
for it.
Yes, we actually, the three of us, Terry, Tami, and I, just had a training hike in Colorado. We did the second highest point in the contiguous USA and the highest point in Colorado, Mount Elbert, last month. And I actually just came back from this last weekend. I didn't summit Mount Rainier, but went to maybe the 11,000 foot space before coming back. But we're each training in our respective areas, and we'll be taking the Machame route up Kilimanjaro over the course of 7 days, beginning September the 6th. I'm
All
sorry,
right.
September the 8th.
8th.
The goal is to summit, and the summit is like 19,341 feet. I feel as though I've been climbing mountains all of my life.
Kilimanjaro is the same thing. Everybody think it's so high, it's so mighty, it's so big, it's unattainable, you cannot do it. Take a special person. It does not.
My dream for the documentary is that women around the world will see it, to see the trauma that Terry, Tami, and I have experienced, to maybe reflect on whatever happened in their lives and what they made it mean. Because each one of us made it mean something. And there's a role I need to play. I want women to claim their place in making a change in the system.
So I'm going to put the link in the description on YouTube if you're watching it, and it'll be on the episode page. And people can donate to help bring this to life. So there's actually a link because it's going to be an amazing story to actually, manifest and put out in the world. I wish you every success.
Oh, thank you for that. I would like to say two things. And one is about courage and courageous leadership. And this has called forth quite a bit of courage on my part. I've mentioned a couple ways in terms of seeing myself as a creative, because that's not how I had identified myself. But also this notion of climbing Kilimanjaro. I didn't mention Terry is 64. She's the eldest of the three of us. So we're all technically middle-aged women. We're not athletes in the traditional sense. And so we've each had to go, okay, what preparation and training do I need to take on personally in order to do this in a way that honors who I am and where I am in my life right now? And then what do I have to get past? The limitation of I can't because I don't like being cold, for example. We can't use the bathroom, like there are no public facilities. We're going to have to camp out. None of us are outdoors people in the sense that we camp for 7 days. What is the wear and tear on each one of us? To what degree are we going to get altitude sickness? I say that because there's just physical ramifications, right? When you're taking on any type of journey, as well as mental and emotional ones. And a part of the distinction I want to draw within the documentary and why I want it to be seen all over the world is my desire is that girls and women will see it and possibly identify with some of the internal emotional challenges or the trauma that we've experienced, to understand what we made that mean, because we made it mean something empowering to ourselves as opposed to it being disempowering, and to really show the metaphor of climbing mountains, physical mountains outside of ourselves, but also emotional, mental or psychological mountains within ourselves, because how you climb mountains in life is how you overcome whatever the circumstances are. So really excited about exploring that, again, showing that relationship between inner and outer that I talked about a little earlier, and showing it in using media as a very hopefully powerful medium to connect.
It brings together so many strands. Pearlette, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your journey, your insights. And I'm looking forward to seeing 3 extraordinary women in the not too distant future.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.